Good evening, everyone, and good day to some. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome, members of Contemplative Outreach Philippines, friends and honored guests, and of course, Ms. Mary Dwyer. Greetings from the Philippines. Thank you for honoring us with your presence. I would like to welcome everyone to our first workshop of the year entitled Welcoming Prayer with Mary Dwyer. It is our honor and privilege to have her as our speaker today. Mary Dwyer was a longtime student of Father Thomas Keating and has been practicing centering prayer since the 1980s. In the early 1990s, not 1900s, 1990s, sorry, she lived at Chrysalis House, a contemplative live-in community experiment blessed by Father Thomas. The community lived according to a rule of life and became an incubator of the practice and programs in the early years of contemplative outreach's growth. It was her experience at Chrysalis House, what she refers to as her inpatient or residential treatment time. Wow, that really sounds like a clinical social worker. That proved to her that a life of prayer, consent, and practice is real, stable, and deeply rewarding. From Mary Rosowski, one of the founding members of Contemplative Outreach and the author of The Welcoming Prayer, she learned that a life devoted to prayer was the real work of life. What we did the rest of the time was just how we made our living. Mary received her undergraduate degree from Georgetown University in economics and spent some time as a banker and college administrator. After a few years at Chrysalis House, she went back to school and became a licensed clinical social worker and practiced this vocation for the next 15 years, all while maintaining her commitment to the contemplative life and to the mission of contemplative outreach. In 2009, she married her husband, Juan, and moved to Miami, Florida. Following his recent retirement, they moved back to Erie, Pennsylvania in July of 2018. Mary is currently in private practice as a licensed clinical social worker and also serves as a member of the Gift Committee and the Welcoming Prayer Service team of Contemplative Outreach. She previously served as chairperson of the Contemplative Outreach Limited Governing Board, member of the Contemplative Outreach faculty, and coordinator for the Living Flame program and coordinator of the Miami chapter. She now devotes her time between private practice and giving retreats and workshops on behalf of contemplative outreach throughout the US and internationally. Before we give Mary a warm welcome, I would like to remind everyone that there will be time for a brief Q&A period towards the end. Please feel free to write your comments or questions in the chat box, which you can find at the bottom of your screens. Click to open the chat box and type your questions on the right column and press enter. Please do not forget to press enter, as we will not receive it if you do not press enter. So again, you can find the chat box at the bottom of your screens. Click, type your question or comment, and all your questions and comments will be collated and passed on to Mary. So also, as a reminder, we will have a short period of silence, at the beginning of this workshop. So without further ado, please let us give a warm, warm welcome to Mary Dwyer. Thank you so much, Mary, for gracing us with your presence today. This morning, 6 o'clock in the morning where you are.
Good morning and good evening to you all. It is sheerly my privilege to be with you. And such warm memories, Grace and Leela, so many wonderful founding members from the Philippines that have been so instrumental in the development of contemplative outreach and all the gifts. So it is my honor. So it is very cold here and it is a lot of snow on the ground. So I am delighted in the darkness of the morning and for your evening time let's just take about 10 minutes to just settle into the silence. Father Thomas taught that welcoming could really go deeper with a silent prayer practice. So that's why for those of us who practice centering prayer, it's the both and, that it's wonderful to have a silent practice, and then we need something for the times we're not able to be silent. So I just invite you to come into the chair, wherever you may be. Just with a few deep breaths to just settle into being. And we'll take 10 minutes now to just breathe. And for those of you who do centering prayer, to ever so gently return to your sacred symbol whenever you're engaged in thought. O God, unto whom all hearts lie open, unto whom desire is eloquent, and from whom no secret thing is hidden. Purify the thoughts of our heart, that we may love you with an undying love. Amen. So good evening to all, wherever you may be. Again, my name is Mary, and I am thrilled to be here with you to share a little practice that is like putting your centering prayer to the next level. In the back of Open Mind, Open Heart, Father Thomas makes the statement that the reason centering prayer is not as effective as it could be is that the moment we leave it, all of our programs for happiness begin to go off, and that interior silence is drained. But if we could have a practice to actively dismantle those emotional programs that we'll be talking about, those first 3 unconscious energy centers, that we could extend centering prayer's fruits into every aspect of daily life. For like most of us, we don't get to sit with our mouths closed in peace and silence for most of the day. We're actively engaged. So how do we take that same intention to consent to God's presence and action into daily life? And that's why welcoming prayer is often called consent on the go. So to begin with, I'd like to share with you a little bit about where this prayer practice comes from. You heard the name Mary Mrzowski, and her daughter, Judith Halbrick, has written Mary's story. It's available on Amazon Prime, but The Audacity to Be Divine is what the book is titled. And The Audacity to Be Divine is about Mary, who was part of that original group that went to Lama, from whence contemplative outreach was really born. Mary was a firecracker, but she was a real authentic person. And the gift of Mary was she was older than most of the rest of the folks: Gail Fitzpatrick Hopler, David Frenette, Father Carl Rico. Mary was in her 50s. And what she brought to it was her own lived experience. She had been married, was divorced, was the mother of 2, was the grandmother. So she was a single woman working in the world. Her ex-husband then died, so she said she was a widow. But all of the practices and all of the reading and the mystics, she always had the question, how do I live this out? Don't just feed those top 3 inches of my head. How does it come into my daily life in the midst of cooking or cleaning or driving or childcare? How does it transform inside? And that's where welcoming is born from, her lived experience, into which she shared with Father Thomas and those she taught on Long Island in New York. And Thomas brought it into the fold of contemplative outreach. She also is the animator of the forgiveness practice as we teach it, and many of our other contemplative outreach offerings. So for me, I always look at great spiritual traditions, always combine both the masculine and the feminine energy. So much of what we experience in contemplative outreach was Thomas's great brain and just, he was unbelievable. But Mary's kind of earth mother sense of it. Her maiden name was Caparosa. Mrzowski was a married name. So she had that Italian, she was a wonderful cook, just kind of that real sense of earth. Anyway, here's what Mary said about what we're going to be talking about. To welcome and let go is one of the most radically loving, faith-filled gestures we can make in each moment of the day. It's an open-hearted embrace of all that is in ourselves and in the world. Wow. In ourselves and in the world. Because Thomas goes on in the back of Open Mind, Open Heart, which I thought I had, but I don't have it marked right now, but I can tell you what it said. He goes on to say, a monastic structure is not the path of holiness for lay folks. The ordinary routines of daily life is, with the never-ending round of ordinary activities. You know the saying, chop wood, carry water? Well, that's what we're talking about. Most of our days are spent in the ordinary routines of daily life. So here comes Father Thomas, who says, it's not to live extraordinary lives, it's to live ordinary lives with extraordinary love. So how do I take that same sense of it into my daily being? What did Jesus say about all of this? Well, in Luke's gospel, he said, in the course of his journey, he came to a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. Now, she had a sister called Mary who sat at his feet and listened to him. Martha, who was distracted with all the serving, said to him, Lord, do you not care that my sister is leaving me to do all this work by myself? Please tell her to help me. But Jesus said, Martha, Martha, you worry and fret about so many things, and yet few are needed. Indeed, only one. It is Mary who has chosen the better part, and it shall not be taken from her. Wow. So Martha did and prayed like I was taught to pray. She didn't blast Mary, did she? She didn't, you know, the look within a family you might get, like, why aren't you doing what you're supposed to be doing? Excuse me, we have company. And Martha probably had something like mine. I like my dinners to be served on time, hot. Everything has to be prepared at the same time so it's ready. So there was a lot going on because we know that Jesus usually had a group of, especially the guys with him, and he told them they don't have to bring their own provisions. They'll be provided for. So what Martha was doing is not a question. They were going to eat her food. They appreciated her home. So what did Martha get corrected about? And I'm with that. As I said, she prayed like I was taught to pray. Jesus, fix her, change him, get them to help me. And Jesus is like, Martha, what she missed was she was in the presence of the living word and serving in her own home. And yet, where did she go? Her thoughts were on what Mary's not doing right. And how often our thoughts and our whole movement gets into, instead of being in the moment, we're focused on what everybody else is doing in the moment or not doing in the moment. And we're saying, God, would you change them? So the welcoming prayer is totally at the service of being present in the moment to the divine indwelling. So why aren't I present in the moment? Thomas Keating has done a beautiful job articulating those first, the development of the human condition. And again, in the back of the Handbook of Centering Prayer, Open Mind, Open Heart, he has this radical statement under the guidelines for Christian life, growth, and transformation. The fundamental goodness of human nature, like the mystery of the Trinity, grace, and the Incarnation, is an essential element of Christian faith. This basic core of goodness is capable of unlimited development, indeed, of becoming transformed into Christ and deified. Our basic core of goodness is our true self. Its center of gravity is God. The acceptance of our basic goodness is a quantum leap in the spiritual journey. Okay, so I accept the divine indwelling. We are incarnational, meaning there is never a moment that God is not present and active in the most flawless way in my being. Mary Mrzowski drew much of this prayer practice from the classic little old book, Abandonment to Divine Providence by Jean-Pierre de Caussade, where he says, there is never a moment when God does not come forward, and all that takes place within us, around us, and through us both hides and includes that activity. Father Thomas Keating put it this way: if God were not present, animating you and me at every millisecond of our being, we'd be a grease spot. So if you look down and you still have feet attached to your being, God's here, regardless of the psychological content of the moment. I may not feel God, think God, but it's standing in the truth of the divine indwelling is that God is here. So what gets in the way? St. Paul said, I don't do what I want to do, but I do what I don't want to do. You know how he kept saying that, kind of talking about this level of, there's a level of unconsciousness. It's what happened to Martha. So as a human being, all of us come into being, everyone on the planet, with three fundamental biological, physiological needs. We need security. And by security, I mean survival. We needed a certain temperature. We needed to be taken care of. That's a non-negotiable with an infant. Finally, or the other piece, we needed to be loved. There's something called failure to thrive. You can provide for all the security needs of a child, but if you don't love them, touch them, coo at them, they physically stop growing. And finally, we all need that little sense of control, some level of power, control, or impact in our environment. This is all fully in place by age 3. The difficulty is none of us get it met to our little satisfaction, whether it's real deprivation, which some have gone through, where there is real deprivation in their security needs, affection, or control, or perceived deprivation. You know, when you have baby number 2 after baby number 1, and baby number 1 finds out it's not king of the universe or queen of the world, they're, you know, how dare you bring somebody into my world and kick me off the throne? So there's a sense of, we form patterns of behavior because we don't know how to deal with the threat to security, affection, or control. Now, by age 4 to 7, what we do is we just drink in all the cultural conditioning or group over identification of where we are, our family's values, our neighborhood's values, our church's values, our country's values, and we develop symbols that mean security, affection, control. And there's nothing wrong with that. Somehow we're made in the image and likeness of God, so this whole movement is perfectly fine. But we come to the age of reason, which is taught to be 13 to 15. If you know any 13 to 15-year-olds, it's very hard to believe that's the age of reason. But the faculties are now developed that we could unwrap those patterns of behavior that we needed when we were little ones to get those needs met, because we're so adaptable. If I'm not getting security in the way I want to, I create patterns of behavior and emotional programs to get it met so I can keep growing. Because look at us, we're all here. So even if I felt a challenge to those, I survived it, and so did you. So we come and we're older now, those mid-teens, but we use those rational faculties to glorify, justify our behavior and rationalize it. Because what's so important in midlife or those mid-years of teens, it's your peer group. So I find others who support what I believe. And therefore, I just pack in this whole level of I'm really right. My way of thinking is really right. So along comes Jesus, whose fundamental message is repent, which means change the direction you're looking for happiness. Remember what Thomas said, we are built for unlimited happiness. And we have a basic core of goodness. It's not that. It's just that it's been co-opted in our development. But instead of using the faculties to look at that, most of us go on and just attempt to get those met in the symbols that we were raised with. So they continue to motivate our behavior. But they're unconscious to us. They were in place by age 3, and then that cultural conditioning from 4 to 7. So I'm not going to think myself better, if you understand me. It's not in a new book. It's how do I consent to God's invitation? So Jesus comes along and says, okay, it's your motivation that helps, that counts. So everybody here, because you wouldn't be here if you didn't already have chosen on a conscious level, the motivation, I want the truth and the values, those beatitudes. I want those to be my motivation in life. But that doesn't do it, does it? So we find a little practice like centering prayer, where we sit twice a day. And remember, what we're doing in centering prayer is we are consenting to the presence and action of God, or the divine indwelling. Well, what's the action? The action is to remove all the obstacles that preclude the free flow of grace in us and through us. That's how we get to love one another. Henry Nouwen put it this way: human beings were built with a need for first-tier love. But the trouble is, we're second-tier lovers. So if I try to get all my needs met at this level of existence, I am constantly frustrated. There aren't enough people to love me, accept me, support me. It's when I connect with my source. God is my first-tier love. So when I'm connected with God, 2 things happen. My extraordinary need for all of these diminishes, and I become a better second-tier lover, able to accept and receive the love coming my way and to give it back. Jesus demonstrated the right response to those energy centers in his desert. Go out to the desert for 40 days and don't eat. In my own story, food's my primary symbol of security. If I am stressed on any level, it's what can I put in my mouth? So anyway, so don't eat for 40 days. And what's the first temptation? Well, change the rock into bread. Jesus says, it's not by bread alone. So that's not diminishing that I need to eat or you need to eat. It's just that there's not enough symbols of security, Mary, to make you really secure unless you find your security in the true one who loves you and supports you at every millisecond of your being. You want a little affection, approval, or esteem, that second energy center, go up to the tallest building in Manila, jump off at high noon, and let angels catch you on your way down. You'll get a lot of esteem, affection. You'll probably make the news. And Jesus says again, I don't need to put God to the test. I don't need to prove to you that I'm loved. It's kind of claiming that we are loved. And finally, bow down before me and I'll give you half of what you see. Your own little kingdom or queendom. It's kind of attractive sometimes. Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. No, the truth is, true security, affection, and control are only found in God. So that's what the welcoming prayer is about. It doesn't challenge that I need security, affection, and control. That's a really important point. It's not saying they aren't important. It's just letting go of my symbols and my exaggerated demand for them that was in place when I was 3 years old. I'm sure we all know adults that tantrum. You know those 2-year-old tantrums? Don't you know people that go off into certain, they're acting like 2-year-olds because we're unconscious. So if we are here and our intention is to love, why do I lose it when someone cuts me off in traffic? Why do I have very negative thoughts in the grocery store if someone cuts me off? It's all those unconscious emotional programs for happiness. But I don't know they're there until they're triggered. Now, all of this is happening at a very deep level. But we are such integrated beings. You never have a thought that doesn't have a corresponding emotion, that doesn't have a corresponding body sensation. And the welcoming prayer goes with it. The warehouse of all of this dynamic is the body. So the welcoming prayer calls us into our physical beings so that my head doesn't jump in, because my head will always rationalize why I'm right. Don't you understand? I know what's supposed to happen. And God's there like, oh, honey, just lighten up. Just lighten up and let go. I really got it under control. It's not all about you. We heard in the back of Open Mind, Open Heart, the true self center of gravity is God. The false self, which is under the guise of those first 3 energy centers and cultural conditioning, its center of gravity is self. Me, myself, and I. How does it impact me? Me, 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 me. So here's what Thomas says. God joins us wherever we are and just ask us to be who we are. God joins us wherever we are and just asks us to be who we are. But not who we are in our unconscious, childish programs for happiness, tantruming that we're not going to get enough. Quite honestly, with 7.5 billion people on the planet, nobody's going to get enough of what they think they need. But that there is enough in the truth of the promise, that's what Jesus came to say, that it is redeemed and we're asked to live into the redemption of it. And we are asked to show up as the Word made flesh in your and my ordinary routines of daily life. In your life and in my life, that's who does God call us to be? How do we interact with the people that are ours to interact with? Father Thomas taught, whoever pushes all your buttons are your greatest treasures, because how else can you access this material? So you start a little practice like centering prayer, and initially you say, oh, it's so peaceful. This is wonderful. And then you go for practice regularly for a few months, few years, it dries out. Your life gets itchy all over the place. People are really bugging you and you think, oh, this isn't for me. when the truth of the matter is it's absolutely working. It is for you because it's bringing up all of the things that you're only asked to look at, to let go of, and to keep moving towards your center at ever deepening levels. So this human condition includes the brokenness and all of that capacity for goodness and happiness. And what we're doing in centering prayer is we're inviting the Holy Spirit in to bring up whatever needs to be healed. And the welcoming prayer is one of the practices we can do to consent to its healing in ordinary life. Because as we teach in centering prayer, the fruits of the practice aren't experienced during the chair set time. You know, when you're sitting down with your eyes closed, it might be uncomfortable, but it's usually in the midst of your daily life that things blow up, right? It's in relationships, it's in work, it's in family life, it's in the world, our poor world. That's where we're getting the opportunity to consent at deeper levels. So the human condition, which Thomas Keating, anything you want to look at, he has a little book called The Human Condition. We have a lot of resources that I don't think you can pick up Thomas Keating's work and not find him referencing the human condition. We'll explain it in much more detail, but that's the basis for what's happening in centering prayer. And that's what we're really addressing in the welcoming prayer of how do we take that same intention to consent, to be loved into life. And that's what we're going to be talking about, this welcoming prayer. Very simple little practice that we will practice. But first, I'd like to open it to any questions. So you heard that if you'd put anything in the chat, if you understand the human condition, if you have any questions, that was a very brief overview. But it's the basis of what we'll be talking about. So you're invited to chat any questions or comments. Do you understand? Do you have one?
Not yet, Mary. We'll just listen and then we will collect everything.
Okay.
As we go along. Thank you.
Okay. So I want to give you a quote from Father Thomas. This is from Notes from a Deeper Conversation. And he says, take and accept yourself just as you are, where you are. Wasn't the message I got growing up. If you are aggressive, lustful, and fearful, or shy and passive, notice your feelings before, during, and after each incident. Without emotional reactions of blame, shame, anger, or discouragement. Let God work with your faults and limitations. Just recognize them and be with them without trying to change them directly. As you watch them, feel them, and accept them, their force and exaggeration will gradually diminish. Keep moving to the center of your being where divine love is, and be present to and welcome whatever bodily emotion or feeling is happening. The present moment contains all you need to be happy. It's amazing that in this world, to really embody that we are called to be happy, and not to diminish that there is real pain and suffering going on, but how do we bring the love and light of Christ into an embodiment to bring it into the world, in the midst, not denying or repressing, because I'm sure we've all tried to fake it till you make it. Like just, okay, I'm going to practice patience, and you just grit your teeth and smile, and everybody picks up your impatience. or we find ourselves constantly frustrated by the same personality type. And we change jobs and we change situations and we keep bumping into the same thing over and over again. But one time they were a male, the other time they're a female, next time they are short, one time they're tall. It's just that that's in me. That's what Jesus is trying to heal. And what I'm doing in these practices is allowing the healing to take place. Because most of us are moving so fast, we don't allow ourselves to be caught. So any questions or comments in that chat? I know you're out there somewhere.
Right now, Mary, there's a comment that says, I love it that you reiterated to be grateful to people pushing your buttons. With centering prayer, I recognize my buttons are pushed, but no longer as intense as it was.
That's a huge insight. And I hope that we all could really embrace it. So instead of being that this isn't working, it means it is working. And that one who just drives you nuts is your greatest treasure. Because those who love us are like sinking down into softness and they're easy. It's the ones we really work at. And what Mary Mrzowski taught was when we really work through whatever the button is or allow the spirit to work through the button in us, one of two things happen. They either don't drive us crazy anymore or they leave our sphere. So it's not that meant that we're continually need to be frustrated or agitated or set off. It just shifts the energy around it. And that's what we're really talking about, is how we're healed.
What do you think was Martha's reaction to Jesus' reply? I guess that's the answer I need. I think, Mary, that's a very loaded question, because many of us really are very Martha. I think we're all a combination of both Martha and Mary. And Lita Salinas always tells me that she always says that Martha is just Mary in action. And I thought that was just an amazing statement. But I think, this question is really important. So she says, what do you think was Martha's reaction to Jesus' reply? I guess that's what the answer I need.
But here's what I love about it. Jesus said to Martha, 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 you worry and fret about so many things, and yet one thing is needed, indeed, only one. It is Mary who has chosen the better part, not the best part. The best part is what you said, Len. The best part is to maintain, whether we're in action or in sitting, that same level of presence to the divine indwelling. So first off, I don't believe that Mary was shamed at all. I think if we really, because shame is often what many of us pick up. Our first response is, there's something wrong with me. I didn't get it right. And not that, Thomas taught that guilt, healthy guilt, lasts about 30 to 60 seconds. I've lived decades in guilt, folks. So that's not the normal healthy guilt. Healthy guilt is, oops, I did something wrong. I'll correct it. Shame says, I am the mistake. I'm wrong. I'm bad. I'm not enough. I'm me. You hear the me. It's me, but woe is me because I'm so bad. I'm so broken that even God can't love me or fix me, or all of that stuff that isn't true. So I hope, and I do believe through all of Scripture, that Martha's response to it was a deeper yes. Teach me to be open to you in my service. And maybe then she could approach Mary and say, would you help me, honey? Do you know the difference between being invited and being shamed? Like that look, I just call it the look. My mother had a look, and she also had a pinch, just The pinch wasn't a tap. It was a pinch. So it was that invitation, because welcoming is also not passive. It isn't meant to say, oh, you can step all over me. Martha needed help. Mary or somebody else in the family, I don't know that it always has to be the woman. Maybe it's Lazarus this time. Get up off your butt and help me. But how do I approach it? Because there's a big difference in saying, I need help versus you aren't helping me. So I think that that was Jesus's invitation. And I think that we're gifted because the teachings that are based on women in scripture are powerful,
Yes.
but there aren't many. So I really look at it, it wasn't a shaming. Now, in the church history, the apostolic or the active orders and the contemplative orders, this is how the contemplative orders often one up the apostolic, like, oh, see, we're the Marys and you're the Marthas.
Yeah.
But it's the best part is to be integrated, whether I'm called to be of service or whether I get to sit back and be a presence. That's the dynamic we're really talking about. Wonderful question. Thank you.
Yes. And Mary, I think a lot of us, we react with our own emotional programs for happiness, because when we hear that Jesus says Mary chose the better part, our first reaction would be, then I'm not good enough. You don't love me. Like you were saying, the shame, you don't love me. That's why you didn't pick me to be the better part. So there's another question, and it says here, I'm wondering what to do when the emotional programs have me in a chokehold. Oh, that's exactly what it is.
Exactly what we're going to be talking about. That's the welcoming prayer. And we're going to, after, if there are any more questions, we're going to take a little break and come back to the actual practice. But the gift of the practice is what I'm really asked to do is to feel the chokehold. And I love that fact, like whether it's at your neck or your chest or wherever you're feeling it, we don't fight it. We feel it, sink into it, welcome it, and we're going to let it go and embrace what's happening.
I'm sorry, go ahead. It's really facing the discomfort.
It's the truth that Father Carl teaches, the issues are in the tissues. Another way of saying it is the only way out is through. So most of us and most of our world teaches us to resist, or if you have something that feels uncomfortable, get that pill, move out of it, pick up a drink, smoke, drink, whatever you can. Don't feel, oh no, that doesn't, oh no, don't go there. So this is a way to go there, but not to act out, not to be a reactive 2-year-old having the tantrum. How to be mature and respond to what's happening in me and see what God's asking me to do with it. This is the time. That's why I mean, welcoming isn't passive. It helps me discern what's mine to do and how do I need to speak up to injustice or setting a boundary or saying no, instead of just engendering more animosity. So if you're speaking to me in anger and I respond in anger, what happens? Anger is talking to each other, but nobody's listening. Versus if you're out of line and I stay with my stuff, I may say, stop, enough. And it can have a serious consequence, but I'm coming out of a different energy, because emotions and all of this body stuff, it's just energy in motion. And one of the things we'll talk about is that in communications theory, like if 100% is what you communicate, words are 7% of it. And when we have something big to say to someone, what do we focus on? Oh, how does this sound? What if I say this? Well, most of the time, it really doesn't matter what you say. It's how you say it. The next most important is your tone of voice. But the most important thing you communicate is your body language. Folks, it comes out our pores. So welcoming deals with what's coming out of your pores to communicate. And that's what we witnessed. Like I watched Mary just morph into deeper and deeper. You witness another's transformation. Thomas said people came up to him and said it was like listening to God with a New York accent. Mm-hmm. What I witnessed in Thomas Keating in my own life is when I first met him in 1989 or 90, he looked like an old abbot. I mean, he was very tall, very straight. And as he aged, not only did he soften physically, but he became a bundle of love. It just emanated this gentle, loving, funny energy just came out of him. Not that his story doesn't hold all the dark nights, all of the purification. So it's still that both end. If I'm willing to walk through it, and there's a German Benedictine, Willigis Jaeger, who makes this point. It takes a strong ego to die. Yeah. It's all of our strength to consent to what we're going to be calling the unloading of the unconscious and the purification and evacuation. The stuff is only needing to come out and be healed. We're just asking to let go of it. It's just that most of the time we're so frightened by what's coming up that all we can do is repress it, because that's what the false self only has two choices. It either inappropriately expresses, we've all been dumped on, or we repress it. I'm not going there. Nope, nope, nope. And the gift of aging is after a while, the body starts to act up and it just can't take it anymore. So you get sick or your hip gives out. Wherever you're carrying your stuff begins to respond. Say, okay, honey, you couldn't deal with it here. Let's look at it here.
There's another comment, Mary. Thank you. That's it really resonates, I think, with all of us. And it says, it's interesting that Father Thomas said, the present moment contains everything you need to be happy.
Isn't it? We just had Thich Nhat Hanh die, and yes. that mindfulness, which is just another way to say mindfulness and Buddhism and the truths of all the great traditions. It's the present moment that we're called to be present in, and to trust that God is fully present, transcendent and immanent, and that we're really built for happiness. Even if happiness is being, like Thomas Keating said, transforming union was being in the heart of human misery and happy to be there. What I'd like to do, though, is it's been almost an hour, so I'd like to take about a 10 to 12 minute break to allow everybody to stretch and move around. And when we come back, we will go right into the human or the welcoming prayer practice on how to address this. Okay?
Thank you very much, Mary. We will have a little bit of a slide, just music to transition for about 10 minutes. So we'll be back at 10 after 8. Thank you.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Yes, we're here.
Okay, and I have posted in the chat just some of the resources. Wait, I just want to close that because it's, whoops, sorry. Okay, what did I do? Shit.
If you send it to us, we can always, or if you can send it, you have, I think, Billy's Viber or text, we can post it in our social media
Great.
channel.
Okay. I thought I just deleted. Anyways, welcome back. I just wanted you to know some resources as we begin this prayer practice. One is through contemplative outreach, there's a 40-day little praxis book called The Welcoming Prayer that leads you through 40 days of practice, because it's like centering prayer. The fruits are only known by doing it. So it's nothing I will say today, but it's by incorporating it into your life. The other resources is on YouTube. Contemplative Outreach has a channel, and we've posted a lot of videos and guided meditation on the welcoming prayer practice. There's actually a meditation chapel that is every Thursday on the welcoming prayer, and the 12-step group, the 12-step centering prayer 12-step community has wonderful resources on welcoming. So each of those websites has the welcoming prayer, all the words and what's available, and then YouTube supports it a lot. So no one's written the definitive book on it yet, but there's a lot of video. We'll see. Mary Merzowski said she wasn't ready to write the book, and the team of welcoming that's been, Father Thomas first brought the welcoming prayer team together when Mary died in 1993. And since that time, and I've been on it since then, we've gone through some variations. Many of you who have been around for a long time may remember different wording. What seems to be happening is the Spirit keeps simplifying this practice and clarifying it. So I think that's why no definitive text on it is available. It's our lived experience of it. So we have this understanding that what I'm doing in centering prayer is inviting the Spirit to work on my stuff, right? And that most of the time, that means it's in the midst of my daily life. So I leave my period of centering prayer or private meditation, and all the emotional programs start to go off. I'm frustrated, I'm excited, I'm nervous, whatever's happening begins to happen. And the gift is I become more and more aware of it. So that's what welcoming needs. I first need to notice that something is happening in me. Many people use the body scan at different times, and we'll go through a body scan down the line. It's not part of the practice. You don't need a body scan, but as you're learning to get in touch with your body and where you hold things, it's often helpful to see where it is. Like, is it your stomach or your gut that talks a lot? Many of us, it's our shoulders or our neck. We might clench our jaw. We might experience a flutter. Like when I'm nervous and it's uncontrollable, what happens is one of my eyelids blinks, and it's outside of my ability to say stop blinking. It just does it on its own. So those types of pieces, if you have chronic health conditions, if you have arthritic hands, I have arthritic hands, if you have a bad back, if your joints hurt, your knee, your hip, whatever it is, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to consent to God's presence and action in the most faultless way in whatever you're experiencing. So even if you know what it is, I'm tired, I stayed up too late, I drank too much coffee or tea so that I have a headache. So what? Before you reach for whatever you reach for your headache, what about praying with it first? So if we go back to that little classic, abandonment to divine providence, there's never a moment that God is not present in the most faultless way in what's happening. What we're attempting to do is to be present ourselves and to first turn to God before we move to the next right thing. So in this practice, it has 3 very simple moments. Mary talked about them as a dance so that we begin to move between them in great fluid motion. But if you see people who dance well, it's hard to believe that those of us who don't and count steps like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 are doing the same thing. But that's how we learn. So we're going to break it apart step by step. But with practice, it becomes one fluid motion, just a full surrender and consent in the moment. The first and most important movement of this prayer practice is to feel and sink into whatever I'm experiencing in my body in this moment. Why is that so important? That people in 12-step programs or that know that serenity prayer, let go and let God, remember that one? Well, most of us want to let go, but we don't want to pick it up and admit that we first have it. So Gerald May, a wonderful spiritual teacher and psychiatrist, taught that the only way, like this glass of water, the only way I can let go of it is to first acknowledge that I'm picking it up. So once I own that I got the water, now I can let it go. But if I never acknowledge that I have it, letting go is just, it's just words. So we feel and sink into whatever we're experiencing in this moment. So take just a few deep breaths. Allow yourself to come into the chair wherever you are. Just notice how your body feels. Can you feel the weight of your body in the chair, right down on those sits bones? Now see if you can feel your feet on the floor or wherever they are. Are you aware of your neck? Just taking a moment, some scan from the top of their head all the way through and from the bottom of their feet all the way up. I'm just asking you to become aware of anything you're experiencing in this moment. I can feel my lower back and I can feel my shoulders. Just awareness of them. If there's a relationship or a person or a situation in your life that you would also just like to be with, you can allow the thought of that person, place, or thing in your life. Just for 30 or 60 seconds, think of it. And now come back and take your inner eye and do a little body scan. What or where in your physical being reacted? Where are you holding that? My sister's having a medical procedure today. Maybe lung surgery, I don't know. So when I think of my sister, I then come back and see what tightens. There's a little tightness that happens in my gut because of the uncertainty. So I don't focus or think of my sister. I only use that to get in touch with what reacts or responds in me. So that's feeling and sink into. Thomas describes it like getting into a jacuzzi. I allow my full attention to feel into, breathe into, and sink into what I'm experiencing in this moment, in this body. Movement 2, gently, I interiorly say, welcome. Welcome. I welcome what I'm experiencing in my body in this moment as my opportunity to consent to that divine indwelling. It's not bringing God in from the outside in. It's knowing that God is present, whether I experience it or not. That's the radical trust. In this moment, I can't experience anything apart from God, or I would be a grease spot. So God is here. I'm affirming that, and I'm embracing it by saying, welcoming. So I'm aware of what's going on, and I'll feel and sink into that. We're going to put these together in a moment. So I had a shoulder going. I had a little bit of a gut. I had a lower back. We'll see what I go to. I'm going to welcome. And then there's one long sentence that we say, which is our way to invite Spirit's healing of any emotional programs that may be triggered. So once we've engaged with it, welcomed it, now we're ready to let go by saying, I let go of my desire for security, affection, control, and embrace this moment as it is. So I pick it up, I hold it, and I let go of my agenda for security, affection, control. I'm not fighting my need for security, affection, and control. It just often doesn't come in the package that I would like it to. So I'm letting go of my inordinate demand for security, affection, or control that's triggered in this moment, and embracing it just as it is. So let's do this now. Just take a moment. What are you noticing within yourself? Are you fatigued after a full day? How do your eyes feel? How's your neck and your shoulders? Just whatever you're aware of, allow your full attention to feel and sink into it. Really become one with the physical sensation you're experiencing in this moment. Interiorly, welcome. Welcome. Stay one with whatever your experience in this moment is. And we say, I let go of my desire for security, affection, control, and embrace this moment as it is. Welcome. If the sensation moves or strengthens, you stay right with it. Welcome. Welcome. Breathing into it, feeling into whatever your experience in this moment is. I let go of my desire for security, affection, control, and embrace this moment as it is. And when you're ready, you just come back. Sometimes what we experience grows, sometimes it goes away. There is always a shift, and sometimes it's just in our experience of what we're experiencing. So you may have chronic lower back pain, it may stay, but because you're praying with it, it ceases to be an obstacle or an impediment to your day. It becomes a way for you to be present to the divine indwelling at all times. Sometimes it just disappears. Other times it really intensifies and lets me know there's something more here. Remember what Thomas said, the present moment contains all we need to be happy. Mary Merzowski used to teach, the real thing is pain. Like sometimes you can have pain in your body, can get cut, emotional pain that manifests in the body, that pain was pain. And she said, it's a beauty enhancer. Suffering is when we resist being in pain. So that if we allow ourselves to be where we are, we decrease the suffering by resisting, I don't want to go there, and we allow ourselves to gently but firmly feel into and sink into what we're experiencing in this moment. Father Thomas said, powerlessness is our greatest treasure. Don't try to get rid of it. Everything in us wants to get rid of it. But grace is sufficient for you, but not something you can understand. Do you see, this isn't the top 3 inches of your head figuring anything out. It's an experiential yes. To be in too big a hurry to get over our difficulties is a mistake because you don't know how valuable they are from God's perspective. For without them, you may never be transformed as deeply and as thoroughly. That's what Thomas taught, that all that's happening in faith we believe is for our highest good. It has something to be healed. It's a healing force. I'm being loved and you're being loved into life, not decimated. It feels like death. I'm dying to who I think I am, what I think I need, how I think you should behave. Martha was asked to let go of all that she thought and to come to the deeper reality. Jesus' invitation is find me there, beyond your psychological, emotional, or physical experience of the moment. Come to me in the midst of it. You know, in John's gospel, at the end, right before Gethsemane and the crucifixion, what Jesus talks about is joy. I'm sharing this with you so that my joy may be yours and your joy may be complete. Now, obviously, he wasn't talking about the emotion of joy, like, oh, this feels good. I'm so happy, happy, happy. He was talking about a deep state of being, that even in the midst of great difficulty or pain or brokenness, I can be joyful knowing that God is present and with me and that it's already been redeemed. Even if I don't know how, that's what we have to bring to the world. That's the incarnation. The Word became flesh and dwells among us and died and ascended. The resurrection and the ascension is what welcoming leads to, but only by walking through it. The wording we say is much like Jesus says, you know, in the garden, he doesn't say, I want this cup. It's not about I want it. I want to be crucified. The response is, I am willing. Please take this cup from me, but I am willing, if it be your will, to drink it. And so that's what welcoming is about. It's not always quote unquote negative or bad feelings. It might be a heightened anxiety or excitement about something happening, but my heart's fluttering and I get that same opportunity to sink into it and to welcome and be present to what's happening in the moment. So let's do it again. You've had a lot of words come at you. So I would just ask you to be present to some difficulty in your life, some relationship, some unresolved question, something that you would consider difficult. Just allow yourself to think of it for a moment. Okay. So now let's just be present to our bodies. Notice what's happening interiorly. What are you experiencing? Any tightness, any sensation? Allow yourself to feel and sink into your physical being and where you may be holding that. Again, I'm going to just go to the lower back. I'm just allowing myself to feel and sink into my spine. And interiorly we say, welcome. Welcome. If it moves, move right with it. It's just energy. I let go of my desire for security, affection, control. And embrace this moment as it is. Welcome. Welcome. I stay one with my experience, anchoring my breath right in my experience. Welcome. I let go of my desire for security, affection, control, and embrace this moment as it is. And at some point, we're just done, and we re-engage with everything around us. When I first learned this practice, I remember going to Mary Merzowski and saying, I'm going to be doing this practice 24/7. And she looked at me and she said, you should be so lucky. Remember, we're unconscious most of the time. What we're doing in this practice is using the amount of consciousness we have to consent at ever deeper levels to the healing. But we're going to go unconscious again. So Carl Jung, the great psychiatrist, said we're about 90% unconscious and 10% consciousness. Mary Merzowski thought that was generous. She said we're about 6% and 94% unconscious. But that means if we do the 90-10, for one thing of 10 things I've done so far today, you're fully aware and conscious of your motivation for one of them. 9 of them are this mix of unconscious motivation. So as the truth of Jesus's word gets deeper, more and more of that hidden motivation comes out. That's what we're healing. That the unconscious motivation aligns with that conscious motivation, our spiritual awareness and our ordinary awareness begin to merge together. And if we could allow ourselves to become 11% consciousness, that would change the world, folks, because it would bring love and truth and beauty into reality. So I'm just becoming aware of what's going on in me, taking a moment. This practice lasts about 60 seconds in reality to feel and sink into, welcome, and let go. The shorthand for it is yes, yes. And then what happens? Then whatever I'm motivated to do next, it may be to walk away. It may be to keep my mouth shut. It may be to speak up and say, that's not right. Stop it. So it isn't passive or allow for victimization, but it's the action comes out of a motivation under the spirit versus under a 2 or 3-year-old's tantruming because we're not getting what we want. So questions or experiences that you're having in this part of your practice. What's happening? Anything happening? You can comment in the chat line.
Mary, there's a question. I mean, I have been working on embracing my shadow and tried to correct myself from a place of love and confidence. I tried to accept myself as I am, but years of guilt programming still rears its ugly head. How can this be healed?
Great question and well stated. First, what Mary Merzowski would say is drop the word try. You have been not you have tried to. You have been consenting to the healing of the shadow. And shame and whatever else rears its ugly head over and over again, but you are doing it. She said, try was a way we kept it. Like, I'll try this out, but we kept ourselves apart from. So watch, whenever you're using your languaging, watch the word try. You're going to try a new restaurant, but you are doing the practice. It may just not be happening like you would like it to. So that's one piece. Secondly, shame. Remember, these programs for most of us, I don't know, I'm 63 years old. So those programs for happiness have been operating a very long time. They don't go away on the first go around. They go, and give it a little time, honey, you'll come around. So they are, like Thomas Merton said, be careful of making friends of the spirit. Spirit's going to ask you to die. So what you're doing is you are basically saying to the false self, which is who you thought you were, who you thought you had to be, how you survived this world. You're basically saying, oh, thanks a lot, I don't need you anymore. So the false self is going to say, okay, honey, you think you don't need me, but let me tell you about it. And after a while, what the false self does is like, oh, she's really sticking to these practices, so I'm going to embed myself in the practices. Father Thomas tells the story, you may know it, of the monk who, as a young man before conversion, drank everybody under the table and felt the great sense of elation that he was the last one standing at the bar. Well, he has a conversion. He goes into the monastery, and it's Lent, and they go on a radical fast. So this guy starts to fast, and he notices all the other monks are getting sick, and he says, I'm going to fast everybody under the table. So at the last hour, when the paschal bell is being rung and the candle lit, he has that same sense of elation. Oh, I did it. I fasted everybody under the table. And Thomas's point is, what changed? His circumstances of life changed, but his inner being didn't change. So this is a lifelong process. And what we are consenting to is even your awareness that shame is up. That's a miracle. Sometimes the best that happens is we're aware and awake to how we are not able to change. That's how change happens. And if we are becoming aware that we're not the healers either, this is what freed me up. I'm not the one fixing myself. What I'm acknowledging is I need healing, and I'm showing up both in my centering prayer twice a day and in my welcoming prayer practice. I'm showing up to say, help, help, here I go again. And it's like going over the waterfall. Sometimes you watch yourself and the rapids are coming and the waterfall, and you like, keep your mouth shut, keep your mouth shut. You're not keeping your mouth shut. Oh my God, you're going right over the waterfall. So sometimes that's what happens. But here's the miracle. I'm not unconscious. I'm aware. I'm not able to stop it, but I'm aware. So the more I stay with the awareness I'm given and pray with what my experience is, the stronger those spiritual muscles become. So that maybe next time I'll be aware back here where it would be easier to divert. Because if at a certain point I'm over the waterfall and I can pray all I want, and guess what? I'm jumping in the deep end. So I don't take myself so seriously anymore, or allow. Here's what shame says. See that? You really can't do that. They get it, but you really can't. You're not getting any better. You better be quiet or go over there. Just don't bother. I'll take care of you. You just stick with me You go back in your little corner. You don't have to be happy. You've been miserable all your life. Why are you trying to be happy, honey? Why? Just come here. It's safe. And that's the illusion, that voice. So what we begin to do is to just keep practicing. Practice, practice, practice. There's more to be revealed. And remember what Thomas said. It's such a powerful line. Just recognize and be with them. Whatever's going on, shame, anger, discouragement. Oh, that discouragement. I can't do this. Without trying to correct them directly, just witnessing that I'm discouraged or in shame. As you watch them, feel them and accept them. Like welcoming takes it to the next level. You don't just accept it, you even hold it. Their force and exaggeration will gradually diminish. But see, back to that other line I quoted. To be in too big a hurry to get over our difficulties is a mistake because you don't know how valuable they are from God's perspective. You know, I was just reading last night. I don't know if any of you participated in the Centering Prayer Summit last weekend, a week ago, but there's a piece, Rising Tide of Silence is the movie, the biography movie that Thomas's nephew, Peter Jones, did on Thomas's life. There's a little follow-up to it called From the Mind to the Heart. There were outtakes of that from a conference, and there's a book, and the video's on Prime Video, but it's only like 30 minutes long, From the Mind to the Heart. But in there, Thomas said, the most dangerous human experience is success. Because success reinforces that it's us, versus powerlessness keeps me aware it is all of God and from God. So I don't know what I need to learn. And I don't know, you know, the gift of shame, it's miserable and I get sick of it and I can feel it like a lead blanket come down on me. That's how I experience it physically, when I feel like that lead blanket. But it keeps me humble because pride is insidious. Like, oh, I got this. You go, girl. Look at you. Oh my goodness. It's not like that. It's really a constant, healthy humiliation. Like, oh, there I go again. But we cease to take ourselves so seriously. And we know that if it is our intention to consent to God in the midst of this, that's okay. I'm just a little, nobody expects that much of me anyway. So be happy.
There's a wonderful follow-up question, Mary, and it says, sometimes I'm so hijacked by my emotions, I don't even remember to do the practice. How can I remember to do it when I most need it?
Great question. What I experience in that is the more I'm willing to practice, the more natural the practice is to my being. So what I recommend is I use Post-it notes to put around to remember to practice. Like sometimes we think, oh, I'll wait till the big stuff comes. It isn't the big stuff, folks. It's the little tiny things that bug us all the time. So what I would do is I would use a little Post-it note and I would put it on my phone or around my office, or just little ways to remind me to practice. I find that a restroom or a bathroom, because it's the one place I could be alone with myself, was a great place to check in. The Quakers have a line. We often outrun the spirit. And once I get going in my day, I get hijacked or too busy. So I needed to pull back. And sometimes I would just stand in a bathroom and put my hands on the sink because it was generally cold, something to bring me into my being. And I would look at myself in the mirror and see if I could make eye contact. How are you doing? Where are you? You're 10 steps ahead of yourself. So just to ground myself. I use this practice as a vestibule to my afternoon sit. Like in the morning, I can move into meditation and centering prayer pretty easily. I'm just coming up, I'm pretty low. But in the afternoon, when I'm out buzzing in the world, it takes me a while to be aware of the chair and to come into myself. So just to take a moment, all it takes is a moment to just kind of come here, be here now. What's going on in me? Feel it, sink into it, welcome it, and let go. It's very helpful for me. I called it an exam of consciousness instead of an exam of conscience like the Jesuits teach. At night, when you get into bed, do you know how your body often talks like you weren't aware of it, but your feet are killing you or your back hurts? All those things when the lights go off and you're finally in bed. Do a moment to just see, what are you holding? What's happening in your body? It's often helpful before you turn on the car. Where are you? Come into being before you engage in actual driving. If you're going to drive, take a moment, just feel, sink into, welcome, let go. It's a very simple movement, but the more I could find kind of natural ways to kind of embed it in my day where I chose to practice, not where I'm like, oh, I need to practice, where I chose to do the practice, the more natural it would become when I was really triggered. Because when I'm really triggered, I'm gone. If it's too far gone, I just wait till I'm over the waterfall. Because, it's like cyberspace. That I don't know what cyberspace is, but when I'm really going, like something really triggers me, I'm obsessive. And when I'm into obsessive thought, if you ask me to feel my body, I don't have one. I'm out there spinning. There's no physical, I'm out there. So there's a little auxiliary practice that's entered at the level of thought, and it's called No Thought is Worth Thinking About. Mary, no thought is worth thinking about. So if I'm in my thoughts and I just can't break out, but no thought, I can't, no thought, honey, sweet pea, I talk to myself. I use whatever name gently with a lot of humor. Sweet pea, no thought is worth thinking about. After a period of time, I might be walking the dog and I'm still ruminating. Blah, 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 blah. No thought is worth thinking about. After a period of time, believe me, my neck will be so, I won't have a neck because I am just totally tense or frustrated, whatever it is. My body will then begin to speak. If there was an experience where I like afterwards, I feel the shame. Well, if I feel shame or like I missed an opportunity, where do you feel that? Where are you holding it? I can then use it with what I'm feeling, not with what happened. I come back to what it felt like to be less than who I'd like to be. What does that feel like to welcome, sink into, and let go of who I thought I wanted to be or who I thought I was? So this is the gift of welcoming. We can always pray it. Even if I'm praying with my inability to welcome. Sometimes I move into like, okay, something big happened in me and everything shuts down. Just resistance comes right up. Nope, you're not going there. Well, can I welcome this, which is basically my inability to welcome? See, in welcoming, all we're really doing is we're saying to God, I'm yours. I'm yours. Here, help me. So it doesn't matter that I don't get to the heart of the matter, the big stuff. If it's my intention to say yes in this moment, that's what counts. It's a prayer of intentionality and consent.
Thank you. And that, I think, actually answers one of the other questions, saying why is it important to feel the experience in the body?
Primarily, I just want to state, for me, the reason the body is so important is, one, it's involved, whether I want it to be or not, because I don't have a thought up here without an emotion, without the body. They're really interconnected. But I have a mind. Here's how my mind would go. Is what I'm feeling appropriate to the situation? Do I have a right to be angry? Let's say it's anger. I'm a 1 on the Enneagram. So anger was a really hard one for me. And being a woman, being a Christian woman, you're not supposed to be angry, blah, blah, blah. Well, guess what? I could tell you, all I knew for a period of time was I had this feeling in my solar plexus right up here. I felt this radiating sense. So I could stay with that. It took me a long time to say, oh my gosh, that's what rage feels like. Because I had a mind that told me good women don't feel that. Or so my mind would always kind of co-opt it, and I'd begin the experience and then it would take me off into my thoughts, or I'd get stuck in an emotional sense of it. We use whatever we have to enter this. So if it is your thoughts, if it is your feelings, you can feel that. But for most of us, our bodies never lie. They're the best spiritual director you will ever have because they tell you the truth. So starting and staying in my physical being kind of grounds it from me getting too intellectual with it. Because my trouble was, I'm slowing down, but I was very quick intellectually. I am very slow emotionally. So the two didn't add up. I was like the tortoise and the hare. My mind was going out here, and very slowly was my, like, what do you feel about that, Mary? It may take me weeks to tell you what I really felt about an experience. I could tell you about it. And if I used my intellect too soon, I might claim something that isn't my truth. So it is much easier to stay with that physical, like, wow, I really feel exhausted. You know how some people just drain you and you feel just exhausted? Well, I could stay with that instead of trying to figure out what that meant. There's plenty of ways and uses for your wonderful intellect and for your emotional intelligence. This just helps some of us really clarify how we pray with what we're experiencing without needing to name it. Now, Cynthia Bourgeault taught the welcoming prayer, and she claimed you had to name it, but that is not how contemplative outreach teaches it. Because for many of us, we cannot really name it. I mean, if you can, great, go for it. But it is not a requirement, which helps. And if you know some of the teaching, like focusing, another practice, they claim that when we start to name things, we limit them and we're already fixing it. This is staying open to more to be revealed. I'm just staying with what I'm experiencing without needing to label it.
Thank you. There, another wonderful question says, so much is happening. I cannot express it well, though. How do I set boundaries with family members that are acting like brats? I practice, but what else can I do?
Welcoming allows us to say what we mean what we say, but not say it meanly. Okay. And boundaries are one of the most difficult things because most of us don't want to upset anybody else or don't want to lose them loving us. Well, you got to like me, but you're being mean and nasty. And so trust the process. What I have found, if it is my intention to be healthy and whole and allow God to love me into life, I have often had to speak some very tough truths. But if I've welcomed first, they come out of me. What my experience has been is I don't want to say them. I don't like conflict. I don't really like to do that. So I'll be like, well, I don't want to like keep trying to bite your tongue or push it down, or no, it doesn't really bother me, or whatever it is. What I found is that God just pokes me and puts me in a position that I just explode. And it's generally I cry, which I also don't like to do in public, but I'll just cry and just like, I can't do it like this anymore. Time out, gotta stop. And that's always been respected and heard, because it's not preemptively. Like for other boundaries, a lot of stuff, folks, is none of my business. I want to tell them what to do, but it's really not my business. So welcoming helps me stay on my side of the street, so to speak. But if it's being violated, it gives me the courage to speak up and say thus far and no further. I will tell you, I've done a lot of parenting courses, and what I had was I do a parenting group, and I had all these mothers that came in, and they were so frustrated because their kids weren't listening to them, especially the little ones. They just, mothers talk. Stop it. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to put you in timeout or whatever it is. And the kids didn't pay any attention. Dad comes in the door and says, stop it. And the kids stopped it right away. And they were like, what's going on? Well, we studied it. And what we found is most, not, this sounds very sexist, but most women were teaching their children. They wanted their kids to understand why they shouldn't be hitting their brother or pinching their sister, whatever it was. It was a teachable moment. But that meant they talked. And the kids knew at some deep level that mom wasn't really going to enforce it as much because she, whatever. Dad comes in and kids know dad's done. No means no. So he doesn't care what I understand. I better stop it. It's very much the same for me with welcoming. When I really hit my truth and I say no, I communicate, or God communicates in me at a deeper level. No, and I'm serious. I don't have to use a lot of words. It's not a big, let me explain so you don't blah, 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 blah. It's simply stop it. So I'm really with that this is the God in us serving the God in others. And when you come to your truth through welcoming, which is just, we get sick and tired of being sick and tired. Like if you're welcoming the same stuff over and over again, hey, wake up. What's yours to do? And yours to do is to say, there's something going on here. Stop it. Period. And that's often communicated in a very simple and direct manner. So it's a dance. I say, stay with the prayer, but it doesn't mean step on me. The prayer gives you the courage to say, stop it. This is something that I've had enough, it just gives you that ability to be clear, because it's when we're not clear that we get stepped on. We're a little smush, I call it smushy, like, oh, maybe, I don't think so, but maybe. And it's versus like, no explaining, no complaining, just no, stop it.
Mary, that's interesting, because one of the things I always tell people when I work with them is that boundaries are not about them. It's about us.
Absolutely.
It's about what we can take or what we cannot take, what we can tolerate or not tolerate, or what are our negotiables.
Yes.
Not theirs.
Wonderful point. And that's why I love welcoming, because it keeps me on my side of the street, because I'm willing to look at what's happening in me and allow God to do in me what's being done. But at some point, if you're like hitting me, it's like, well, get out of the way, stop it, and I'm going to move. So thank you, Len. That's beautifully said.
And I think it's also, it's so much integrated into our centering prayer practice, because I find that as I practice more, it just, I don't know if the word is create, but it just creates an observer self more than anything else, because then it's not that I'm separate from myself. It's just that I can observe myself. And again, like I always say, if I can hear more of what I say and watch what I do, then I probably won't do half of it or even more than half of it.
And isn't that the miracle? What I'm with is there are miracles happening. It may not resolve a situation, but the miracle is I'm aware in the midst of the situation and I see it.
Yes.
That's an absolute miracle. In 12-step circles, we always say, God does for us what we can't do for ourselves. So even the awareness of my powerlessness or my need for God, that's a quantum leap, I do believe, in this whole process. It's moving out of that sense of perfection. Like, did I get it right? Do I get an A? Am I doing it? Am I perfect now? Am I perfectly loving everybody in my life? What is that? That's what I meant in the beginning. I'm a human being. Human beings, we mess up all the time. This changes it, though, because I don't deny that I messed up. If I made a mistake, it also gives me the humility to say, please forgive me. I'm sorry. That's okay. You get that privilege of joining the human race.
And yet, like you always say, it's finding that balance of, I'm not just going to say, well, you know what, I make mistakes and then I won't correct them anymore. It's really finding that balance. Yes, I acknowledge that I do make mistakes, but it will not stop me from trying to do the best that I can.
Absolutely.
So,
and Mary used to say, it's never about what's happening. It's about what we do with what's happening. Mm-hmm. So I don't have to judge the fact this is happening. Oh, look at you. I can't set a boundary. I'm in this position again. What do I do with it when I'm aware and wake up to, wow, here I am? That's what I'm invited to feel and sink into, welcome, and let go of this experience right now.
And like you said, it's not really passive. And for me, from my perspective, it's really about cooperating. You're not just saying, okay, I'm going to accept this, that's it. I'm cooperating with the movement of the spirit. There's another comment that says, knowing this just now makes me realize I have decades of kept and avoided feelings, emotions, and grudges to deal with. I thought avoiding is key, but now I need to acknowledge them all so I can let them go. Thank you for this talk. I need to practice 24/7.
Me too.
Or work towards 24/7.
What I would like to do is to take a short break and to come back, have a little more practice, and just talk about the fruits of this practice. Okay?
How many minutes would you like, Mary?
What do you think? It's 8:00. I have 8:07 here.
We have 9:07 here.
Okay. So how about 7? Well, let's come back. Let's take 10 minutes and come back and move your bodies in the interim.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much.
Welcome back. I'd like to share a quote from Father Thomas again. God is already here. Hence, to search for God at a certain point in our spiritual evolution is a mistake. Let me read that again. God is already here. Hence, to search for God at a certain point in our spiritual evolution is a mistake. It is no longer the proper time for that kind of effort. The most productive effort is to accept the endless humiliations of the false self. The spiritual journey is not a career, but a succession of diminutions of self, as Teilhard de Chardin put it. This has nothing to do with the neurosis of low self-image. Okay, so this isn't to prove we're less than, because we're not. It is simply the fact that we are completely dependent on the love of God. We are always in the arms of the beloved, whatever we may feel or think. So this practice allows me to be with whatever's going on in me that is kind of blocking. It may not be blocking. So I turn to the Lord and say, here I am, which is what I'm saying in welcoming yes. Maybe it's not the false self in action. Maybe it's simply that you bumped me and my arm hurt. It doesn't matter. It's always an occasion to say yes at ever deepening levels. And that's what the spiritual journey is. The more we're awake to it, as was discussed earlier, the more aware we often become of how much time we spend in shame or fear or restriction and constriction or judgment. Oh, that darn judgment. We judge others, we judge ourselves, we have a thought for everything. It's just a simple little practice that takes the yes into everyday life. So let's begin. You've had a lot of words this evening. Let's just practice our yes again by just coming into the chair. I would think you may be tired now. Wherever you notice any sensation in your being, any twitch or feeling, heaviness or lightness, I feel it behind my eyes. I'm just allowing myself and invite you to feel and sink into your experience in this moment. Deep breath into it. Welcome. Welcome. I let go of my desire for security, affection, and control, and embrace this moment as it is. Welcome. I let go of my desire. Welcome. For security, affection, control. Stay with what you're experiencing. And embrace this moment as it is. You're invited to post any questions or comments throughout this, and Len can just kind of clue me in. Again, the wording for this practice is on both of those websites I shared, contemplativeoutreach.org and cp12stepoutreach.org, under the welcoming prayer. The little CLP booklet is a wonderful support to it. And the brochure, it's all available on the website. The shorthand for welcoming is a deeply embodied yes. So it can be done as soon as someone confronts you, or the phone rings and you hear that tone of voice, to take one moment. This practice is really consent on the go. 30 or 60 seconds to just breathe into your belly drop. You can always say, could you repeat that so I can hear you? I want to hear you. Jerry Hastings calls that point often the squirm point. Just when you feel something and you start to just squirm a little, you just take a moment to be with it. Knowing that God is already here in the most faultless way. And what we're doing is awakening to that, so that we can be all that we were created to be, which is bringing love to whatever the situation may be. Not a sentimentality, a love like, oh, I love you, but true love, which is often healthy boundaries, clear challenging, to say what we mean, to mean what we say, not say it meanly. Another way to say that would be to say it in love. So that human relationships are fraught with brokenness. We wound each other even in the best of circumstance. So this practice is at the service of, how do I stay connected and love? Not by practicing perfection, but by staying within my own experience. And what this practice, I believe, does is it teaches us to really lighten up and let go and keep moving at a deeper level, instead of letting the voices of shame and judgment. What do? That's generally when we walk away from our own experience. We walk away from God, and therefore we walk away from each other. So this keeps us deeply engaged. And then we let God be God. I don't know what you want me to do in the situation, but I'm willing to show up, and I'm willing to step into the unknown. Remember that the book that Centering Prayer is based on is called The Cloud of Unknowing. And what I love about the cloud is the piece of it, the prologue, is the little prayer I cited. And I just love that prayer. Oh God, unto whom all hearts lie open mind, open heart, and from whom and to whom desire is eloquent. Those deepest desires on your heart, they're from God. They are part of the plan. What we're doing in the welcoming prayer is we're letting go of how our egos, false selves have co-opted those desires. So you are to be loved because you are lovable. Just the person you think should be the one loving you may not be the one who's loving you, but other people. So it's opening to love. It's opening to security. Yes, you do need security, but it may not look like what you thought it looked like. And you do need control. I always say, I need a little place in the world that's just mine. Just like go and shut the door and you just have your space. So it's learning that interior freedom to find out where that is. Desire is eloquent, and from whom no secret thing is hidden. Shame tells us to hide in the shadows. You know, that shadow self that's not acceptable to God. Everything in you, you are known and loved from the inside out. So that's all welcoming is doing, is opening you to what God already knows. It's not a secret. And it's okay to have all our bruises and all our woundedness, because that's how it's healed. And it's only in the cracks that the light gets through. So it's in those, not a low self-esteem, like Thomas and William Menninger and Basil Pennington They kind of developed the worm theology. It's not that, oh, you're a worm and not a human. It's not out of low self-esteem that you take this humiliation. It's out of a healthy sense of self that you can say, wow, I messed up. I'm not better than anybody else, but you're not worse than anybody else either. So you need a healthy ego to let go. So the first part of the journey may be putting yourself together in a healthy sense of self. Some of us have really poor, low self-esteem. So God may build you up and then dismantle all of the false self, but it's not in a less than. It's that you have a deep sense, even in the midst of utter disaster to your ego, that you're being loved into life, not punished.
You know, Mary, Carl Jung calls that the middle passage. Not midlife, but middle passage, thank goodness. You know, and one of the things that struck me was when you were talking about really loving. But when we love somebody, we tell the truth. And yet not everybody is ready to hear the truth. So I guess my question would be, where does that put us? How can we express that without hurting?
There was a great quote I loved from, I think it was from Paul VI, actually, in the 60s, but he said, wise is the one that knows that portion of the truth that's ready to be spoken. And the serenity prayer in 12 step circles, I love. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Okay, beautiful words, right? Serenity and courage and wisdom. But I would always be like, how? Well, how? Which one is this? That's where I find welcoming is totally at the service of. If I stay with my experience, if I am willing to feel it, sink into it, breathe into my experience, to welcome, let go, and embrace this moment, I can trust that divine intuition that I will know the next thing to do. Do I speak? Do I let it go? You know, so much of it is just, how important is it really? Mary, just shut up, move on. But other times it's like, I have to speak. So this gives me that intermediary moment that the witness and the observer comes together in prayer, but first turns to God, like turning here, here. It's really turning here. What would you have me do? And then trusting the moment, because what I do experience is welcoming helps me talk less, so that when I do share, it's not much. But I think that we all can say, we know when we speak in love, it is heard differently than if I speak out of anger, I beget anger. If I speak out of fear, what comes back? If I speak out of judgment, that I'm saying it because I know what's better for you. Jesus told Martha, I think it was like this, oh, Martha, Martha, I love you so much, honey. I love you. I love you. But you're worried and upset about so many things. You don't need to be. You know, that kind of tone comes out so differently than Martha. Martha, you know, that judgment piece. So wonderful question, Len. And I don't think there's a clear answer. What this does is it just allows us to go for the deeper sense of what the spirit in us is doing that may be needed by another and may not.
You know, one of my favorite authors, Helen Luke, she would always say that balance, it's finding that balance, but balance is really not just finding middle ground. It's the tension between opposites. And like you were saying, you know, to have that interior freedom to know, okay, is this a time to say something or to just shut up and not even have any facial expression, because people look at our faces, you know, body language, as you were saying. So it's really discernment at that moment.
and vulnerability. To have the vulnerability when we really stand in the truth that we are loved beyond all telling, and that our worth is not dependent on your acceptance or approval. You know, so much of our these energy centers are contingent on others loving us, and because we needed it. They had to love us as little ones or support us, or we would die. So it's an energy. But when we really come to be loved into life, which is what I think these practices do, they love us into life, that we step forward in love and we offer it without demanding it or commanding it. We just offer our truth. This is how I see it. Do with it what you will. And it gives that interior freedom to us. It also respects the freedom of others. Because when Thomas said that transforming union was like being in the heart of human misery and happy to be there, there's a lot of grief and sadness, and particularly in the moment of this worldwide pandemic, there is a lot of brokenness. So we don't deny it. I can't fix it, but I can witness to it and bring to it love and compassion that acknowledges it. And this is where welcoming, you know, many of the practices and much of mindfulness is all about allowing, being curious, accepting, acknowledging. Okay, so welcoming takes all those, but it goes to the next. I don't only know it, I welcome it. And I embrace it and I let it go and I show up right in this moment. So that's the radical, invincible trust that welcoming calls forward, that I can be vulnerable in my humanity and allow it. The gift is I allow others then to be in their humanity too.
There's a comment here that says we do not analyze or process our feelings and experiences during our welcoming practice, right?
Right. If there is something that keeps coming up, I trust that I will have the clarity to see the pattern. You know, as I said, it takes us a long time sometimes. I'm very good at seeing other people's patterns, as I'm sure many of us are. Oh, do you know you do that? It's seeing ourselves like, oh, wow, look at that. This time and that time and that time and that time and that time and this time and that. Maybe I have an issue with authority, or it may take us a while, but this practice is experiential and not the time to analyze, because under my false self system, which is operating, you know, it's in the background operating and we're just gently dismantling it, I have a tendency to justify, analyze, rationalize, and glorify my behavior, because I will find a way to tell you that what I'm doing is really needed and right, and that you don't understand, but I'll show you. So yes, it's very true.
And the dismantling is what causes us a lot of suffering also, because we resist that change. But Richard Rohr, yeah, that's true. I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
No, I'd love to hear Rohr.
Yeah, but Richard Rohr also says that transformation comes from great suffering and great love.
It's true. Thomas kept saying that over and over again. And what Rohr also says, which I think is so important, is that we need successes up to 25 or 30. We need a healthy sense of self to feel it has some bearing.
Yes.
But that after that point, it's really only through our failures that we learn anything. I mean, I'm only willing to let go when what I'm doing isn't working, which is why Thomas, mentions success is one of the greatest dangers at it to a certain point, because then we start to think, I've got this. Where does God fit? Well, I don't know, but I've got this. You know, I have a friend that used to keep a little sign on her door, on her refrigerator door, that said, she used her name, but like, thank you, Mary, I don't need your help today, God. Because often we begin to operate as if we know. When the true humility is know what you know. Like, I know that running into the street, I could get hit by a car. We know some things, but I don't always know what's best for me. And that means I don't always know what's best for you. And as adults, we begin to operate in a different construct than we do as if we were in charge and that everybody's a kid.
And I think that may be the danger of parents, or even parents, or people like, who work with people, who work, like, for example, in your line of work, as a social worker or as a therapist. Sometimes people think that, oh, they know better than their clients, but you got to listen to them because they know what's best for them. We're just helping them sort things out.
And in that same vein, Lynn, that's wonderful. That's why I'm saying trust your body above all. It's almost like we have different parts of ourselves, our emotional lives, our intellectual lives, and our physical. The one that never lies, that always shows up in truth, is your body. Do you know how? And that's why I love little children too, and really old people, because they'll tell the truth too. The filters, the little kids don't have the filters yet. The old people lose them. But you know how you'll show up and somebody will say to you, you look awful. That everybody else might think it, but their filters will come down, or a little kid will be scared. Like, I have an older sister who said she got really in trouble because an older woman came to babysit them, and my sister was little and said, you look like a witch. Well, she did look like a, often we get craggy or wrinkly, and it wasn't meant as an insult. But that's what begins to happen. Those filters that we put on it, we start to believe them. Like, I know what another should do. Heck, I don't know what I'm going to do later on. I think I do. I might have a plan. But under the guise of the spirit that we're talking about, Thomas says it was good to have plans, just don't stick to them. God could ask you to drop them at any moment, and to trust who's really animating you. St. Paul said, it's no longer I that live, but he that lives in me. So if we really are saying yes to our transformation, we are surrendering at greater and greater depth who we think we are, so that we can be who God needs us to be in this moment. And it may be uncomfortable. It feels like death. So that gets into the dark nights and all of this. We switched in contemplative outreach. If you look at the earlier information, it was all about unloading. Now, what do we talk about? We used to talk about unloading and purification. Now we use the word transformation, because the upside is it's how we're transformed. The downside is it feels like utter destruction. So when your prayer practice dries up, when centering prayer, you would rather do almost anything than sit. It's when it's working at its deepest. When your life is blowing up, praise God. It means that you're just getting all these opportunities to free up, And God is joining us right where we are, asking us to be who we are. But who we are is not who the false self tells us that we are. It is who we are in the truth. So that's what welcoming is at the service of. I feel and sink into what I'm experiencing in the moment. I welcome it as my symbol of my intention to consent to God's action in me, in my body, in this moment. And I simply let go and embrace this moment as it is. Yes. Do with me as you will. Yes. It's our ability to have the fiat of yes.
Another question is, can you do the welcoming prayer in anticipation of an emotion?
You can, but it's not out there. Like I did it with surgery, or you can do it with, if there is some event that's coming up that triggers anxiety or fear or anticipation and excitement. It's not out there in the future. What you do is you allow yourself for 30 or 60 seconds to think of the event or the situation or the surgery, whatever it may be. Then come back and check in with your body. Where did it land? What's happening in you when you think about that to happen? So if you see it, it's in the present moment. Welcoming is always in the now. But you can use the mind to bring up the now and get that, or the future thought, and see how the now reacts to it. So I did it a lot, and it was fascinating. I was going to have surgery. This was years ago. So I was giving my inners, I was telling them they had the consent with the surgeon's hands. So every time I thought of the surgery, my gut tightened. I welcomed and I let go to be part of the process. This is what fascinated me about it. My surgeon told me, he said, wow. And he was a older, he was a well-known surgeon with a lot of experience. He said, I've never seen anybody so relaxed on the table. What fascinated me about that was I thought everybody under general anesthetic with a spinal tap or whatever they did, I was totally out for a series of hours. I thought everybody would look relaxed. Wouldn't you think? Like, give you enough drugs, you're done. But he didn't know what I did, but he recognized a difference, which I believe was the practice giving my body consent to trust the process and move into it. So this practice can really change. We are often like, I expect you to be a certain way. So you know how families are, like that great line, if you think you're so enlightened, go home. So every time I see you and you give me that look and I react this way, and pretty soon it's who knows what started what. But if I stay with it beforehand, often I show up in a different energy. So I'm not reacting. I can actually see it and I can choose. That's where choice comes into it. Then I get to choose how I respond instead of being under that constant, unconscious, automatic reaction that gets us into the same thing over and over again.
It's really about recognizing the patterns in ourselves. Like you were saying, it's easy to recognize patterns in other people because then we're not related to them. But to see that in ourselves, that's the struggle. That's the challenge. Yes, thank you. Going back to your comment about success and failure, I was just thinking that when we feel successful, we never question why me. It's only when we fail that we always say, why me? Or when I find myself in a bind or in a spot, that's the only time I say, why me? Why don't we ask ourselves, why me, when we're successful or we are, given everything that we ever want? So now there's another, I just wonder if the practice can work just the same with persons who have mental health concerns, like those with depression or anxiety, or this presumes one is on a sort of stable mental health condition to really get into the practice.
The wonderful question. I have great respect for all those who deal with serious mental health issues. One of the things, just on a very superficial level, usually depression is when I am either repressing anger or living in the past. Anxiety is when I'm moving into the future and fear-based. And so this practice, all of these practices help immensely, because what they tend to do is to roll back the story, whether it's the backstory or the future story I'm telling myself, and keep me grounded in the moment. Now, I believe clinical depression is organic too, so I'm not discounting medication, treatment, therapy, but to understand that what we are promised is in the moment, that grace is sufficient for you, for it's in your weakness, there lies my strength. That's the promise. So when I can show up to my anxiety or my depression by feeling it, because it's always physically, you feel it. I mean, real depression, there's no question where in your body, how you feel. So you feel it sink in, breathe into it, welcome it like an old friend, welcome, knowing God is in it, and let go of everything that I have the over-identification with security, affection, control, and embrace this moment. It'll lead you to the best therapies that you need for it. The same with anxiety. So it can be used and prayed with, because all we're doing is turning to God first, saying, here's where I am. I come to do your will, or speak, Lord, your servant's listening, all those old scriptures. Yes, I'm here. This is where I am. What do I do next? And it may be go to your therapy appointment, get on that medication. It can always be used. It may not be the only thing you use, but it is always helpful to say yes to God in the moment.
And it takes a lot of courage to acknowledge that, you know what, I will go to my therapy session. I will take that medication. And
I
to
agree.
be vulnerable, like you were saying, to that movement, to really listen to that movement of the spirit within. So
if I broke my leg, if I break my arm, I'm going to welcome, but I'm also going to get myself to the hospital and have that set and put in a cast and do whatever needs to be done. Exactly. So it's the same. It's not an either or, it's an integrated whole that I'm given the opportunity to pray with it while I avail myself to all the other things that are being put in my path.
Mm-hmm. And yet, in many ways, I think persons who have mental health concerns also have to deal with an added dimension or an added level of perhaps guilt, shame, the stigma Absolutely. Attached to it. So it's like this vicious cycle of even our own programs for happiness, because a lot of people start feeling blamed for their mental health issues or
Absolutely.
mental health concerns.
Absolutely. And I think that if we look at anything, Thomas Keating taught that the old paradigm of like Jesus as the physician, the divine physician, the healing, he said, if Jesus came today, it would be the divine therapist. That's really, Jesus didn't come because we're so healthy, but came because we are so messed up. But that's okay, because we didn't mess ourselves up all, this isn't an inside, it's really part of the plan. I don't understand the big plan, folks. I just know it's already redeemed. And these are ways that I live into the redemption instead of into the chronic repetition of the brokenness. So as we go forward, your task is to practice. That's all. The trusting that it's even not we who pray, but the Spirit that prays in us. What we demonstrate is our willingness by showing up to ourselves, and we are physical beings in our bodies, to show up to it. That's what we're praying with, and allowing God to do in us what we cannot do for ourselves. And it's just us being loved into life. That's all. You're being loved beyond all telling.
A wonderful, wonderful thing, but and you're right. It's just practice, and to practice when I think the best time to practice is when we don't feel like it, when we feel dry, when we feel everything is useless, because sometimes I think we expect that miracles will happen during that 30-minute prayer period or 20 minutes for other people. But it's really after that. It's living that contemplative dimension of the gospel on a daily basis, like you were saying, moment by moment.
I'd just like to end with Rumi's poem, The Guest House, which just sums it all up. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. even if there are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He may be cleaning you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent to you as a guide from beyond. So I will turn it over to our wonderful hosts. I'm so grateful to have been with you this evening for you. And I trust as our journeys will come together that we're just meant to practice, practice, practice so that our ordinary lives can be filled with extraordinary love.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Mary, do you mind if we take a souvenir photo? We'll just ask everybody to please turn on their videos, turn it on, and we will just take a photo. Okay, so can you just smile? Thank you. And then next page, hold on 1 second. Please turn on your videos. Okay, there we go. Thank you so very much, Mary. It was such a pleasure to hear you and to listen and to really listen and be present in the moment. Thank you very, very much. And I think Billy might want to say something. Billy, you want to unmute?
That was so beautiful, Mary. I'm sure we're going to ask you for another talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, so everybody, please, thank you so much for being with us. And our the next talk on Saturday will be Father Jordy's third conclusion on wholehearted prayer and building a psychological wellness and well-being. And then, of course, next month will be the second Saturday of the month with Father Bob. He will be talking about creating a domestic monastery during this time of COVID. So again, it's on Saturday, growing in interior freedom and psychological flexibility. And then in February, it will be creating a domestic monastery during this time of COVID. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. We appreciate it. And thank you once again to Mary.